right, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of Twin Cities Trekkies. I am Wes Huntington.
And I'm MacKenzie Flickinger.
And today we're just gonna, for this first episode, we're gonna be talking about our Star Trek stories and how we became fans of Star Trek, and then we're gonna talk about other the characters that we personally feel that we're connected to. So if you have any suggestions or feedback, please email us at tctrekkiespodcast@gmail.com or go to the Facebook page. Go to facebook.com/tctrekkies. So I think that's.
Or you could just straight up slide into some DMs if it's appropriate questions. I'm always down to engage with people and chat. So
yep,
you can always hit me up on the social medias from Instagram, Facebook. I don't know if Snapchat's even considered cool or relevant, but there's that too. Twitter that I don't use, I just lurk. So
yeah,
any of those are good mediums for communication.
Yep, and keep in mind that any feedback that you give us may be used in a future episode of Twin Cities Trekkies. All right, so I'm gonna be let's start off with our Star Trek stories here. I pretty much grew up into Star Trek. My parents are huge Trekkies themselves. My mom watched the original series when it was first aired on NBC back in the 60s. And then, I don't know how my dad got started watching it, but obviously I want to mention that my first name of Wes comes from Wesley Crusher, Will Wheaton's character from The Next Generation.
I knew it.
It's really weird how that all happened. So it's really weird because my dad really wanted to be, he wanted me to be a junior. But it was not like that. But and then they said, okay, let's figure out a name from The Next Generation, which was on at the time when I was born. So, and I was born in the middle of the third season. So they decided to name me after Will Wheaton's character, Wesley Crusher. So and that was actually really interesting to see that happen and stuff like that. And I've been watching Star Trek ever since. I have been, I think I've watched Next Generation probably through and through maybe half dozen times. I generally agree with the fans that the first two seasons are very uneven, while the third to the seventh are better in quality.
I think that's a curse with most Star Trek series, right? It's like the third season it gets better.
It grows the beard. It grows the beard, as they say on social media.
Yeah, it grows a beard.
Yes, it does.
A beard, hopefully.
It grows the beard. So it's really interesting to see. Granted, there are some gems from the first two seasons of Next Generation. Conspiracy for one, the one with the parasitic life forms, like for example. But we could talk about that. That would be more about favorite episodes down the line. Yeah, definitely. But definitely the third to seventh seasons are good, and that's like. And then I start. Like I said, I watched all of them. I haven't watched most of. I haven't watched like a full binge of the other series, maybe because I just I generally just go to
What
episode.
sentimental value with associated with Next Generation? I mean, you're named after it, and it was on when you were growing up. That's pretty.
Yeah.
That's a pretty substantial reason. I mean, that's part of like what really influences my favorite series and my favorite characters and everything. And that goes to show how much that impacts like being on air at that time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely. Yep. And I have actually caught up to all of the current shows.
I can't say the same.
I know we talked about this when we were planning this, going like, I think I need to watch Star Trek Discovery season 3, which, yeah. But yeah, I have caught up on all of the current shows. I mean, I watched the third season of Discovery when it was every week on All Access, which is now becoming Paramount Plus coming next month. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see what's going to happen. My personal take on Paramount Plus, if I want to diverge a little bit,
Yeah.
my hope is with Paramount Plus that's going to be starting on March 4th here in the United States and Canada and Latin America. Yeah, it's really
Yeah,
it's like a
nice legalities.
Yeah, it's like, and I hope that my hope is that they will end all their current contracts with the other streaming services and put everything of Star Trek on Paramount.
Star Trek Utopia.
Star Trek Utopia on Paramount Plus.
That would be nice to have one place to access all of that, because that's sort of like the thing of where if you want to completely indulge in Star Trek, you kind of have to hop around the different streaming services to kind of assuage that need. So
especially
kind of, I mean, that's classic. Like depending on the year it was released and how old it is, like who owns it, and it's like, come on, just for the people. Put it somewhere for the people, man.
Especially for the overseas fans. Because I've seen this happen a lot, especially with the new shows. Especially with when the short treks were announced back in 2018. Netflix, who had the rights to Discovery outside of North America, and they had the streaming rights to Discovery. They weren't sure they were going to air the short treks there, but then they ended up airing all of them at once. So that's my hope for overseas fans to end all their contracts, because right now Netflix has the streaming rights to short treks and Discovery, while Amazon Prime Video has Picard and Lower Decks.
Yeah.
So
which throws me off a bunch.
It shows them off a bunch. It's causing them to pay more for streaming services like what we experience here in the United States. I mean, granted, I have like maybe 5 streaming services total. Some of them are free, some of them are not. So.
Yeah, and it completely depends. Like, it sucks that you have to be subscribed to so many for a selective set of things to watch, which that can be really frustrating, because that was for a long time. I didn't have CBS All Access because I was just like, originally, just Discovery, and I'm like, maybe if the other Star Trek series were there was other content surrounding that, I would be really into that. But it's hard to convince myself to get this when there's no other shows I'm interested in on that streaming service.
And now with Viacom CBS being merged as one again for the first time in 15 years, it's like all the content from Viacom is now on All Access, and is going to be expanded even bigger when Paramount Plus launches next month. So, and I heard that it may up the price, but I've heard a lot of things saying that it won't. The current prices for All Access, which is $6 for the commercials and $10 without, is going to be the same for Paramount Plus. But who knows, with Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus, they've all announced price hikes. They've all announced price hikes, especially Disney Plus, which is going to go up by $1 starting later.
The competitive fandom owning.
Yeah, to begin the fandom owning, Yeah, and that's why I'm thinking, and like I said, this whole Star Trek thing being exclusive to Paramount Plus is the same. I akin it to the Marvel universe and The Simpsons
It is.
on
It's the
Disney
same
Plus.
type of argument happening of like legalities around who owns it, who gets the profit off of it, and it all really plays into how popular it is too, which is really annoying. But it's like they're only going to care about it if they can make profit off of it, and it's like it's sort of like they're spending all this time trying to figure out how important these series are to people, and then if it is, who gets to say they own it so they can make money off of it. And it's frustrating because it's like it sucks to be, I mean, our whole lives in the 21st century are basically being like products that are being sold to media, like, but it's just frustrating with like seeing how they handle things like fandoms, or it's like these are like user supported things like fan support, and people keep these alive by watching it. Like, please find a way to come to an agreement on something so that it can be accessible to everyone.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like that's a big thing that a lot of Star Trek fans, such as yourself, are really passionate about. Besides just liking the shows, it's about accessibility and the ability for people to actually like access that content.
Yeah, exactly, and especially within the era of COVID-19, especially.
Yeah.
Because everyone's stuck at home, quarantining, whatever they're doing to stay themselves safe from the virus. Yeah, especially with Star Trek fans. I know a lot of people that I've seen on the social media groups that I know you and I are a part of on social media for Star Trek. They say like, "Oh, I'm binging Star Trek right now because I'm staying home to keep myself safe from COVID-19." So
a lot of people have had that like experience where this is their first time actually watching Star Trek because they've been home, and it's such a. I mean, it's cool, but it starts unearthing those frustrations that people have about not being able to access some of that stuff. When they start hearing about people watching, it's like, I heard that this was super good, like this series, I wanted to watch it, but I don't have access to it, so I guess I won't.
Yeah, exactly. And, and I hear the negative side of that as well, regarding like, oh, I had to pay to watch Star Trek.
Yeah.
And, I'm going to hate on it because I had to pay for it.
Yeah, that's frustrating. I'm like, well,
and
time's money, man. People
when
I contribute a little bit to keeping these like streamable. So
when I did my old Star Trek podcast, because when Discovery premiered, it was 2 weeks after Seth MacFarlane's The Orville had premiered on Fox. So and I did a podcast episode about that, which I'm going to talk about my other Star Trek podcast in a little bit, but because that's part of my Star Trek story. But I remember I did an opinion episode about that, saying they can coexist.
Yeah.
And I see that all the time. I saw that all the time when the Orville and Discovery were on at the same time. People were saying the Orville's real Star Trek and Discovery is crap. It's SJW.
Depends
crap.
on your take. It's
all that hater talk.
Like your opinion, man.
It's your opinion. Don't force everyone to your opinion. That was
and no one has to ascribe to people's perspectives on that.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, there are thousands of people who subscribe to those like hater YouTubers. They're called the Fandom Menace. I've heard that called
awesome.
and some people have called that on social media accounts. They've called those people the Fandom Menace because they'll never be happy of what's on that they like. Like, they have hated on Discovery and Picard and Lower Decks since they have aired, especially Discovery. I don't get why they say STD. I will never understand that because none of the other shows started with STD as their acronyms. ST with their acronyms. They decided to be STD just to be haters.
Yeah. Because most it's like, TNG is just the next generation. And otherwise and then the original series, but they never include Star Trek. And then Voyager was never acronym because it's just one word. So, and same with Enterprise. So
yeah, exactly.
Deep Space Nine, this is DS9. So
yeah, and then, we're diverging here. Let's go back. Like I said, yeah. So I haven't really watched the other series through and through. Especially, I did watch Discovery and Picard, because they were like I watched every week when it was
Yeah.
on. But just to like say, hey, I know I can talk about it and stuff like that. So, but I haven't watched like Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise all the way through. Um, I did. I started watching. I watched Voyager for a little bit when I was a kid. I kind of grew out of it because I was a kid and I was watching other shows like on Nickelodeon and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And Star Trek really didn't like. I was still a Star Trek fan, but
Yeah.
I didn't like watch.
You already had your series that you grew up on.
Yeah, and that was always on, especially after the show was off. It was always on the local channels. So,
Yeah.
and it was always on like once or twice a night. And then it was on, and I watched it then and go to bed. But then, yeah, I didn't. I haven't watched DS9, Voyager, and Enterprise all the way through. I did watch the third and fourth season of Enterprise when they were on, just because I know that the series was gonna be kaput. And it was really good. And I have some. I don't get me wrong. I collect all the physical media too of like on Blu-ray of the ones that are available. Actually, not like I wish DS9 and Voyager would be remastered. I do wish they were remastered, but definitely I wish they were. But especially for like Paramount Plus and that kind of thing. Especially for
yeah. That's like the passion that people have for wanting to continue loving a show that they already do love, and like it shows also the possibilities of like how they can reiterate a lot of this stuff. Like you can remaster it and like work on like adding like finding bonus material on like cut scenes, things like that, like keeping in like fans engaged, but it's not like a dead series just because it's not airing anymore on TV and the type of thing. But
yeah,
exactly. There's still so much that can be done with these shows, like remastering them or doing like best of Star Trek, where people do like I've seen stuff like Netflix tried doing it for a little bit, like where they had like with some shows they would do like highlights of like big series, like highlight episodes, and it's like, hey, if you want to binge Star Trek but you don't feel like trying to binge all the series, here are like user curated top episodes that you should watch.
I agree, and I hope that if they ended up doing that, especially when Paramount Plus does launch, and they do that, I would hope they would do that. Because because I know some fans, especially when I'm friends with social media, when I was on his podcast 3 years ago for a Star Wars podcast called Beyond the Outer Rim. I'm just going to make a little plug in there for that one. Little plug in for the Beyond the Outer Rim podcast. His name is Jonathan. He told me when he and I were talking about Star Trek and Star Wars, he told me that he started watching Star Trek when the first Kelvin timeline film came out in 2009. And there are fans who started in May of 2009 going like, oh, Star Trek, this may be cool. I go see the movie. I love it.
I appreciated that because I had so many people who for years just kind of thought Star Trek was some weird niche, like out there thing that their grandparents or parents watched, and that it did. And a lot of people weren't even aware that there were other series that much. They just all thought it was a continuation of one. And then it's like just not, like they're not part of like understanding that universe, so they don't really care. But it was the first attempt at like it getting onto cinema besides like the actual like movies from the from the 80s and stuff, like all of those films like people weren't even aware of. Like I had a friend who literally went to go see the first Star Trek, J.J. Abrams universe Star Trek movie solely because Chris Pine was Captain Kirk, and then she's like, I can get behind a Captain Kirk played by him, but she only knew about Star Trek through the lens of me, and even so, she barely cared about it. So it was like to suddenly see a bunch of my friends and people that I went to school with get really excited about Star Trek, I was like, yes, finally, it made it to our generation's mainstream media.
Yeah.
Like people actually care now.
Yeah, and I knew, and like I said, I know people who started with the '09 movie, and and they went backward. So, and they go like, and they watched the original series. They thought, oh, this is cool. I'll watch Next Generation, and they think, oh, this is cool too. Um, but then when I talked about it with my friend Jonathan, and I told him like you really should watch Deep Space Nine. Deep Space Nine is actually my favorite Star Trek show now because of the fact of the matter is the characters of DS9 have when they do an action, there are consequences.
Yeah.
There are consequences because in Next Generation and the original series.
Bird clock. I have 3 bird clocks in my house. Welcome to the podcast, bird clock.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. So the reason why I say that because the actions have consequences is because in the original series and the Next Generation, with the exception of like Worf in the Next Generation, for example, they would do an episode in 45 minutes. They save the planet from a virus, whatever the plot was of the week, and be done and warp out to the next planet.
Prime directive be damned.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. If it needed to be violated or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty much like that. But then we got into like, when actions have consequences, with definitely with Deep Space Nine. Some of it was in Voyager, definitely in Enterprise. Especially when the Xindi arc started in season 3 of Enterprise. But then and now with the serialized version of Star Trek with Discovery and Picard, not so much Lower Decks, but
yeah,
that's more episodic, which is good.
Yeah.
But definitely with Discovery and Picard, it's like serialized one story.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, we get to the end at the end of the season. And that's unfortunate. I mean, I'm hoping that with the new shows that are being announced, like Prodigy, which that might be exciting to see, especially with Kate Mulgrew being back as Janeway. And then, what is it? Strange New Worlds.
Yeah.
That's what I'm really excited about because the producers said it's going to be episodic with some serialization. So pretty much like Next Generation was.
Yeah, that you could watch them without needing to continually watch them in order to understand what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. And that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely like there's pros and cons to like having something like that where you do have to watch them in order to understand what's happening. Like it could be really engaging and then people get really invested because then they can really spread out a story and get into the details of it. But it can be hard for people who aren't like invested in watching a show and having to see like 6 episodes to understand some plot point. And I know like that has definitely been a turnoff for some of my friends who have tried to get into Star Trek, like watching the series, being like, I just don't want to watch 6 seasons of something to understand what they're doing. And, it can be a little heartbreaking. So I'm like, but give it a chance. But it also is really nice, like, when people can watch, like the original series and they just watch an episode and they're like, hilarious. I'm going to go watch another random episode. Like, how insightful and cool. And, like, you can kind of pocket those. But you can sort of pick and highlight a lot of each series and sort of get the gist of plot points happening throughout the series, too. So there are ways to compile and make it work too.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. Especially with the older series. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I guess back to the Star Trek story here. I was into it, and I still watched it. I had friends when I was in college who liked it too, and stuff like that. And then it's just like and then I went back. I went to school twice, got a bachelor's degree in creative writing, and also a bachelor's degree in mass communication. And I did radio broadcasting, and I thought I'm not gonna be able to do what I want to do because I don't drive. So I ended up talking about in April, I'm going to talk about my old podcast now. So in April of 2018, I decided to launch the Minnesota Star Trek Nerd Podcast. I struggled for that for a little bit for the title because I was just going like,
how do we make this concise and catchy, but also like identifies who I am?
Exactly, that's pretty much like because I had moved to Minneapolis in that previous fall, and I'm going like, okay.
You're originally from Minnesota, right?
Yes, I am.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Born and raised here, but definitely. So I decided to launch the Minnesota Star Trek Nerd Podcast. It was about anything regarding Star Trek. You're paused.
I am?
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Oh yeah, I was actually sitting really still. That's all. I was like, I sometimes have a really bad habit of sitting extremely still, and it kind of throws people off because I could just like not blink for a long time. Oh. And a lot of people will be in meetings and people are like, Kenzie, and I'm like, huh? No, whoa. You scared me, like statue myself in rooms.
Yeah. So back to the Minnesota Star Trek Nerd. It was about anything related to Star Trek, which is pretty much what we're going to do now on Twin Cities Trekkies and stuff like that. I decided to talk about Discovery. I decided to talk a little bit about the Orville. I did a few episodes about the Orville. I know I did that. I did character moments from the first season, which was then ended at the time. Same with Discovery, which was ended at the time as well. Did several theory episodes about what was going to happen in season 2 of Discovery, because all we had at the time was the ending scene where the Enterprise and Discovery meet each other in space, and that was it. We don't know why they were there. So, well, but we then knew later on. But why? But so then I had a few guests on the show from other podcast networks. I actually became a guest on a few podcasts. I have actually a few friends who are Star Trek podcasters themselves on social media, and they have become some of my mentors regarding this kind of medium.
Yeah,
a little bit of it.
Which is new to me. I think podcasting is something that I myself consume a lot of. Like, I love listening to podcasts, but I myself have never been a guest nor a host on anything like this. It's kind of an interesting way to, not Minnesota interesting. Minnesota interesting is not a good thing. Yeah. It is a truly, genuinely interesting experience to have.
And for those who don't understand, Minnesota interesting is like, this is terrible.
It's the nice way to say this is terrible.
It's our Minnesota nice mentality. That we say things that are interesting because they're terrible.
The nuances of Minnesota nice, like true Minnesota nice versus the quoted, air quote, Minnesota nice, which is usually what people are referring to when like teasing the Midwest, is that quote Minnesota nice, which is not nice. It's just like a nice to your face, but not actually being nice.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, we kind of have a problem with passive aggressiveness in this state. But that's beside the fact. Like I said, I had a few friends who were on my show. We ended up I was a guest a few times on a podcast network, especially, and I was guest on podcasts myself. Then I actually enjoy talking with them and say like, oh, they shared my same passion as me. I can talk to them about this, and that's kind of why I kind of wanted to. And then unfortunately, in February of 2019, I had a personal Twitter account at the time. I don't have it anymore. So I used to be very different. Used to have very different viewpoints of how I viewed the world at the time, and someone decided to broadcast those.
Oh, yeah.
Someone decided to broadcast those, and and then it blew up, and I decided to end the Minnesota Star Trek Nerd Podcast out of respect for everybody who was listening. And then
it's not fun to be doxxed by people, especially if like they're already going into the situation with like a preconceived notion of what they want to get out of it. Like, it doesn't feel nice to have people frame you in a certain light. Like, people are allowed to grow and be questioned and defend or throw away their viewpoints. And I'm a firm believer in that, where I've had friends who have said things that maybe people go, not so sure about that. And then, but give them the space to be able to either defend themselves or, you know, talk about it. But I don't like the culture of grabbing like very out of context information about somebody just to push a sort of like perspective on this person, where it's like, yeah, but like we can discuss this rather than attack, you know, and if there is something wrong with it, I'd like to know. And so I'm not sure if that's how it went for you, like you were attacked or if you had a chance to like discuss, but it is tough to go through that. Like, social media is a wild beast that not even Star Trek as a futurist like dream was able to predict something like that existing. Like, this piece of technology I never saw predicted is social media.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Unfortunately, I was to elaborate on what you were asking. Yes, I was attacked. And I ended up having to do a video apologizing because I was just saying that they were like, I did a 2-minute video saying like here's the face of who it was, and saying that I am sorry for what happened. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I hope I can regain your trust again, and that was that. And I flew off the radar. And I deleted everything that was related to it off of platforms. I mean,
and that's the thing too, is like a response. I mean, it's unfortunate that you can have a conversation about it and then it instead turned into like a complete retraction of anything that you've done up to that point because of things you said. That's something that, I mean, I think is important to discuss about fandom culture in general. Like, it can be an amazing space, but there were also some big downsides to some fandom cultures. Like, especially from the perspective of someone who might not be like a guy. Like, my own experience with Star Trek, which I'll talk probably about a little bit in my own Star Trek story, of just that, like, being a part of a fandom that you love, but not everybody being super cool about how you are there as a person. And that can be really tough to balance, where people who are part of the same fandom you enjoy don't like you as a person, like, or the types of things that you say or like or engage in outside of that fandom. People will shame you out of that space because they don't like you or you don't fit what they think is somebody who deserves to be a part of that fandom.
Yeah, definitely. And so I actually, fortunately, I have retained a few friends from that ordeal. One of them who's expressed interest in being a guest on our podcast.
Heck yes.
Yeah. So her name's Amy. She's from Las Vegas, and home of the Star Trek home of the big Star Trek convention every year, with the exception of last year because of the coronavirus.
Hey, not fun fact. Unfun fact. I've never been to a Star Trek convention, so
speaking of
hoping that I can take that off my bucket list someday.
Yeah, I've actually never been to the one. I've never been to STLV, but I have been to a few Star Trek conventions when I was a kid, when they were here in Minneapolis at the convention center. So, and I'm hoping when COVID is, under control, that people can gather again in big, large spaces and, mingle with people. That
I'm hoping. Breathe on strangers again, please.
Yeah, exactly. I would hope that we, maybe you and I can do like a panel or something like that at GalaxyCon or
oh yeah, it's so unfortunate because I think GalaxyCon always fell on like a weekend that I was doing something in my hometown in Western Minnesota, because I specifically remember I lived right by the convention center and also by the Hyatt Regency place where they also would hold it too. Yeah. And I mean, right there in Loring Park. And I mean, I would walk by as there's like setting it up, and I'm like, I should go to these sometime. And then when a bunch of my friends would reach out to me being like, Kenzie, people, like, we all know that you like Star Trek and all things related to space. Why are you not here? Like, where are you? You should meet up with us. And I'm like, I'm not in town. Constantly and consistently miss GalaxyCon every year. So hoping that I can change that in the future.
Yeah.
And somehow make my family not have plans that every time that happens, I'm like, come on, please go.
Yeah, it makes sense. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, definitely. Like I said, my friend Amy, she wants to be on the podcast someday. Hopefully we can get Zoom and figure it out. The reason we're recording this over GarageBand and Messenger today because of Zoom.
Oh, yeah. We get to be a little audio engineer, folks, today.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So, and I've been, I actually fell a little bit out of the fandom for a little while when that happened. I was like feeling like, do I really want to watch more Star Trek? And stuff like that. And I decided, like, you know what? It's my fandom. It's my thing. I can watch it whenever I want. And I eventually went back to watching Star Trek again. And,
Hooray!
Yeah, so that, like I said, I've caught up on all the current shows now, and then I'm doing this now again. I'm talking about Star Trek again on a podcast. It's been as of this, it's been about a year, almost 2 years since that happened. So, as we're recording
kudos
this,
to you for coming back. We're happy to have you back in the community.
Yep, exactly.
I've seen people get scared away for whatever reason, or pushed away, I guess, to put it better. Not necessarily implying everyone's scared when they go away, but for their own mental health, like, are pushed away for whatever reason, for the best of their own mental health, needing to leave as well. But that's something that would be an interesting topic to talk about, like fandom culture and that type of impression that it can leave on certain people, depending on like who you are as a person, like gender, occupation, political standing, socioeconomic status. Like, what does Star Trek mean to people who fall into these different realms and the intersectionality of those? Because not every fan looks the same. And not everyone who watches Star Trek feels the same way about the messages.
Yeah, exactly. We can definitely talk about that in a future episode. All right. Kenzie, why don't you talk about your Star Trek story?
Well, a little bit about myself. I grew up in rural Western Minnesota, so born and raised in Minnesota. If you couldn't tell by everything about my accent, being Minnesotan. My dad is a super huge Star Trek fan. When I was growing up, he was really into science, and there was this whole culture in my household around just like being in love with science, like being invested in it. Like, my dad was a mechanical engineer, and he'd always show me all his like blueprints, things like that. And his biggest things were like working on anything that was NASA related. So looking at like engine parts for like the International Space Station, or for like suits that the astronauts are going to be wearing, and all this like cool mechanical content. And his biggest thing for going into that was because of him growing up with Star Trek as a kid. And he watched the original series growing up. He loved it a ton. He thought it was a really good idea of like the what if like scenario of what does humanity look like in the future. And his dad was not a fan of Star Trek. Super huge like Western TV show guy, like watching Smoking Gun and Bonanza type of stuff. And he would tell my dad like, oh, like they have things like the tricorder, or being able to look up anything in a directory on a ship, or flying in space, like all these things. Like, and my dad was born in 1968, so that's the year before the moon landing, right? That's right. Yeah, 1969.
Yep, it is. Yep.
Moon landing. Yeah. So I always mix it up because Stanley Kubrick did 2001: A Space Odyssey in '68 and shot a scene on the moon, and that was part of the whole conspiracy of, we were like, moon landing's fake type of stuff. But my dad, my dad just really loved all these pieces of technology and how cool they were. And, you know, his dad was like, oh shit, you know, this is so out there, you know, no way ever. And so growing up, like, my dad would just always chide him, you know, jokingly, like, we were growing up being like, hey, remember when you thought it was wild that we'd have like these personal devices, like you could communicate, and it's like now we have cell phones and, you know, all this communication technology that just seems so outlandish at the time. You know, there are definitely some aspects of technology in Star Trek that are still haven't been attained, but just growing up with that and seeing my dad's excitement around the stuff that, like, all the like technology content that was in the show made me really excited. And then my series that was on while I was growing up was Voyager. So I was born in 1995, and so that year was when it came out. Like, I think it was like January 1995 or something it started. So yeah. I grew up always seeing that on TV, and my dad consistently watched it, so I just watched it with him. And then on top of that, there were always series of the Next Generation series and the original series were always on, like, randomly on weekends, late night. It's like, oh, I have the flu. Guess I'm going to turn on TV Land and watch the original series all morning. Like, so I became really familiar with all these characters, and my dad also collected the trading cards that were out for, like, Next Generation, original series, and Voyager as they started putting them out. So we'd always look at those, and they had, like, little snippets about episode information. And I also watched a lot of Carl Sagan's Cosmos when I was a kid. So it was just, like, exciting to see this, like, science fiction take on the realities of, like, this science that's being talked about, and just having this whole, like, just constant obsession with sci-fi basically in my house. So my dad and I would just watch the series together, and I just thought it was super cool, especially Voyager, just seeing, like, engineers like B'Elanna and Seven of Nine, who are just these super smart engineers, and I'm like, I can do that too, you know? Like, I always knew I wanted to go into science, which today, as of this day, you know, I'm a software engineer. I went to college for computer science and minored in mathematics, and then also was originally going for physics because I wanted to go into astrophysics because, you know, I'm like space and space physics is neat. But I wanted to do something a little more applicable. But to me, just all the technology in Star Trek was really inspiring. And it's just something I was very passionate about. Like, I definitely had my, like, Trekkie clothes. Like, I loved trying to dress up and having, like, my cool graphic tees that had Star Trek on it, and had a little communicator badge. Like, I was always really excited about that. I had a band teacher in middle school who was really into Star Trek too, and one day he showed up dressed up. He had a phaser and, you know, his tricorder and stuff all, like, hooked up on him, and he had his uniform and everything. And no one in the class knew, like, coming from a small town, like, not a lot of rural kids, I feel like, watched Star Trek or had parents who were really into it that much. It's just not really, like, that area is not as common, I feel like, for people to like science fiction, I guess. I don't know why, but just seemed to be the case. And he walked in, I instantly was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool, like, Next Generation uniform, like, that is awesome. And everyone's like, what is she talking about? What is he dressed up as? And I'm like, telling everyone, like, they're, like, teasing him for it, which made me sad, because I'm like, wait, like, so many people don't even realize, like, I love this stuff. And people gave me so much flack for being, like, really into him wearing that and being like, that is so cool. Like, yay, Mr. Barton is my teacher for being a huge Star Trek fan, and, you know, like, being really cool about it. And I took a picture with him and brought it home and be like, Dad, look, like, my band director is, like, really into Star Trek too. But it put this weird note in my mind of how people treat it sort of like a niche culture, like, people being like, oh, you like that? And I'm like, what of it? Like, it's really cool. Like, it's like they're on, like, a boat, like, at the sea, and, like, working, like, it's like some sort of, like, military format of, like, exploring and, like, researching things and understanding the world around them. I'm like, what's wrong with this show? But I think it's just more the, like, culture that around the show that people made fun of. And it was just such a weird thing to grow up in, where it's like, you don't look like a Star Trek fan. And I'm like, what does that mean? What does it mean to look like a Star Trek fan? And being into it, being like, oh, you must be a nerd, like, said in a derogatory way, which I'm like, everybody's a nerd. Quit it. Like, get out of here. And so for me, I mean, it's always been like a very heavy influencer on my take of the world and just how we perceive the unknown and like where we are going in the future, like with technology and with how we are as people. Like when I watch Star Trek, I'm like, there's a hope that at some point we unify and can get along and see beyond just our own planet, even our own people, and have something for the greater good for all of us, you know, which I think right now, like, it's very different culture that I feel like would be kind of unattainable with the way that Star Trek is laid out. But something like a First Contact and like seeing that whole thing play out and how that works in the non-Dark Mirror version, you know,
Yeah.
like the good way, not the scary way, but you know, it's just, I guess I've always just liked the social commentary of Star Trek and just relating to the episodes and like the topics they cover and situations that they discuss and how they handle them. And even with other shows, like, I mean, the Orville's big on that too. And like actual commentary, like Lower Decks is some really great, like casual commentary about like what it means to be not one of the big guys like in a show and like what does it take to run a ship and like seeing the behind the scenes. And I guess I just really like that kind of commentary that Star Trek has provided. And growing up where a lot of people were more into like Star Trek and there was this, or Star Wars, and there was this whole weird binary if you have to like Star Wars or Star Trek, I always thought was wild to me because I'm like, why not both? Like, how are those even comparable? You know, I never understood that. Like, I was always a big fan of Star Wars as well, and I had people who'd be like, "Oh, yeah, Star Wars or Star Trek," and I'm just like, I'm not gonna choose because they give me two totally different sources of happiness. I don't know, like they both make me happy for their own reasons.
Yeah.
So no, I'm not gonna compare the two. Like choose one or the other.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's like, you know, and I you know, definitely like you know, you and I have something in common, Kenzie. Our fathers are mechanical engineers, so yeah, my father is a mechanical engineer too. So
That's awesome.
yeah, so but he does like stuff for like machinery for like, you know, factories, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like your dad is way beyond that.
Yeah, he's definitely like he's always been enthralled with space and the fact that he has the chance to make, obviously he's so passionate about his job and like the things he gets to create, and I mean it rubbed off on me growing up, just like seeing that he could be so passionate about something that he does in science. And you know, I'd meet people who knew my dad growing up. Like I found out when I was growing up that my dad had a Star Trek club with a few other people who were like parents of one of my friends who actually has a Star Trek name, Tashale, and you know, like a Vulcan name, and their little club was called Trekkidans. And they would meet up and watch episodes and talk about it like a book club, but you know, with watching episodes. And you know, they would go to like conventions and stuff with each other, and you know, they just all things Star Trek. You know, they were the nerds in my small town, like having their little group. But I always loved it, and the fact that the people that were in that named their daughter after a Vulcan name, I always enjoyed, because when I finally did get to meet her, I'm like, full circle, I already know you because my dad and your parents, like, we're in a group together. So we're already automatically friends because of this connection.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. I think we should, you know, move on to the characters that, you know, we identify with. Um, you know, you may not know this, Kenzie, but I am on the autism spectrum, so I'm on the higher end of the spectrum. Thank goodness. I mean, I could have been very low. Who knows?
Yeah.
It's all a matter of
Yeah, that's such an interesting realm too, because I think a lot of people are either not diagnosed or like they're misdiagnosed, or a lot of people go their whole lives not knowing. Like when you look back, a lot of people retrospectively figure out that they might be on the spectrum more than anything. Like especially like women, they find it usually a lot later in their lives that they fall on something. Like, and then there's always like the weird realm of things like ADHD. Does that fall on the spectrum? Is that outside of that? How does that work? And
yeah.
where do people lay in that? Because like I struggle with ADHD, but luckily for me, I was always able to somehow take a step back and manage to get through school without taking medication. Whereas my brother, he had to pretty heavily in order to do well in school. So different experiences of how your brain works. How do you delve into social situations, and like how do you take information out of situations? Like it's such an interesting study. Like I wish I knew more about like autism and like how that spectrum works and how it affects people's lives differently. But it is interesting. Like I've met friends who have had like Asperger's, and how they learn to live with something like that, or take a step back and sort of look in at themselves and understand how they're being in a social situation.
Yep, and that's what I have. I actually have Asperger's syndrome. Yeah, but yeah, definitely. I'm on the higher end. You know, that's generally on the higher end. Asperger's is. But you know, I recall like characters that can immediately pop in my head are characters like Data and Spock
Yeah.
and all those characters who are aliens, you know, who are like part of the crew, and they teach they I think they teach the fans what it means to be. They teach the other characters as well as us how to be human. Like
Yeah.
especially with Spock, for definitely, you know.
Yeah.
And then Data's trying to understand humanity, you know, and
Yeah. What does it mean to be alive?
yeah, what does it mean to be a human, you know, kind of that kind of thing, you know. And I recall once, and this is something I watched once, that Brent Spiner, who plays Data, and he said one fan came up to him and said it was actually her son had autism, had Asperger autism, and she told him, "You made my son love you because you have become a kind of like a de facto spokesperson for people with autism."
Yeah.
With your character on Star Trek. So
Yeah, the way that he analyzes things like from a very like logical, completely analytical standpoint,
yeah.
without like the inherent, like supposed inherent social cues that a lot of people take for granted having. However, that is programmed in our brains that somehow randomly is lacking in like on the autistic spectrum. But it's a good way of interpreting that and sort of giving like a perspective into that of like how does that work, how does that look. And people who fall on the spectrum definitely, I feel, would identify with that, seeing how he behaves, how he questions things, being like, I would feel the same way. You know, I'd ask that too, and maybe some people react weirdly to it, like viscerally to things being asked, or like that's really forward of you, or that's like a really odd thing to say, or you know, and things where it's like, well, is it, and why is it? And that's why I like Data as a character, where it was like somebody who people would be like, that's different, but why is it? And being able to understand that, being like, he is just as human and interactive and alive as we are. Why is it that we're reacting differently to him, like behaving a certain way? Or is that just normal? It's just a different kind of normal. Like, what is normal?
Yeah, normal is just a setting on a washing machine.
Yeah.
I've always liked that quote. Someone told me that once, and it wasn't like a Star Trek character or anything like that. A friend of mine actually told me that once. Yeah. Normal is just a setting on a washing machine. What is normal?
I like that.
It doesn't really
normal
exist.
Is completely, it is a completely trivial thing. There's no such thing. We say it a lot in conversation, like, oh, like that normal thing. But is it like, I once said that this was my normal hair color. Like the blue and green is how I have my normal hair color. People cannot see, like having having my hair dyed that way, and people being like normal, and I'm like, normal, I guess societally, I don't know. I could argue it to be like, yeah, this is normal for our time and for where we live and for me being in the occupation that I am. I don't know. We could totally splice it up until it makes sense, but normal is just such a trivial thing that it could just be. It's so easy to just dismiss and be like, no, that's not. It's normal for you, normal for the circumstance, I guess. Some weird micro circumstance or like micro situation, but not cosmically.
Yeah, definitely. And I also thought of like another character, Saru from Star Trek Discovery. I mean, granted, I don't want to. I mean, I know what happens, but
Yeah.
I'm not gonna spoil it for you.
Oh, don't worry, my dad already spoiled a lot of Discovery for me, so I'm like, it's okay. I'm like, I actually am not. Another thing to talk about later is I'm actually not averse to spoilers. I really don't. I don't know. I don't really react negatively to people spoiling things to me, so I don't know. Like I'm always like, oh, cool. I guess when I get to that, I'll be like, hey, I remember when so and so said that. Like, unless like I don't know. I guess it just doesn't really cause a reaction to me to have that. But I know for a lot of people that can be extremely upsetting to have something spoiled. Yeah. I just personally don't react that way.
That's good because I generally don't either.
Yeah.
I'm just like you, Kenzie. When someone says like someone tells me something happened, and I go like, oh, when I watch it, it's like, oh, okay, this is what someone said. Like, oh, this is really cool. This is really cool. So yeah, definitely. When he,
then I look forward to seeing it. I'm like, cool. Like now let's lead up to why that's the case.
Yeah, exactly. Especially with like Saru, with Star Trek Discovery, first he's like afraid, he sense the coming of death because of his stress ganglia, but then in season 2, when they come off, and he completely transforms his personality. It's pretty much like anybody who's done a wrong like I did, and could be redeemed and be a better person, because I think since he
everyone's allowed to grow.
Yeah, he lost his ganglia in season 2. He turned into a different kind of person. So
yeah, not all change has to be something that's bad. Like most change will always lead to something good, which another arguable term. What is good and what is bad? Like you can on some more like we could sit here and talk ethics and morals of what those are, but people have their opportunities to grow, and everyone should be allowed to have the space to grow. Like when I see people who initially make me viscerally react like negatively, like someone says something where I'm like, I don't like that, or that's a terrible perspective to have, or that's a terrible thing to say. I very quickly turn around to like, why is it that they say that? What has happened in their life to make them like be that way? Or maybe they just don't know. And that's where I always approach, like when I have differing opinions or differing views or things that I'm like, that's not good. I try to, discuss that with that person or find a way to engage with them in a way that allows them to explain themselves so I can better understand, because I hate to just like blow someone off because I don't understand where they're coming from. I don't give them the chance to sort of redeem themselves and be like, why is that? Because maybe in the end they have no redemption and they were just a terrible person from the beginning, which that's whatever, then I'll walk away from it. But more times than not, it's usually some form of ignorance or just lack of exposure to something. People being like, I didn't realize that, and thanks for being calm about it and talking with me about it. So that I like the opportunities of growth that happen throughout all of the Star Trek series, like with characters like someone like Seven of Nine and Voyager, like how she grows from very much being into her Borg side and being spiteful about leaving the Borg, but then being able to re-explore her humanity and understand what it is to be human and balancing those sides of herself, like the pros and cons of each existence as an individual versus a hive mentality, and like how it means to struggle through something as an individual but in a community versus like being in an actual hive community, not having to struggle through something. Like it's just an interesting take on like a character, like, and I can appreciate any character who does any form of growth from an old persona to a new persona in the series.
Yeah, definitely. Yep, definitely. Yeah. So, yeah, I would love to see. Speaking of Seven, regarding like she changes and stuff like that. I'm kind of curious what changed between the end of Voyager and the start of Picard for her, because
Yeah,
she totally left the Federation. She joined the Fenris Rangers, uh, and that kind of thing is like. I would like some backstory on that, please.
yeah.
Just a little bit, thank you. I'm good if you give me a little backstory of why she became what she is in Picard. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, but hopefully
which is
that'll.
gonna be pretty jarring for people who have like seen her, like especially if they've only seen snippets of her at the beginning of even Voyager when she was first introduced in the show,
Mhm.
versus that, and it's like, whoa, there's so much character growth that happens between that introduction to now, like it's crazy.
It is crazy. Yeah, I agree. All right, so I think we should end this first episode here, and
Yeah,
then go on to episode 2. But
yeah.
like I'm gonna say this right now. Next week it's gonna be episode 2. It's gonna be our favorite Star Trek episodes. So take care and live long and
Oh man,
prosper.
yeah. Live long and prosper.